The city of Dubai does not simply occupy space, it defies it. It is a paradox of existence, a metropolis of glittering glass and audacious steel rising with improbable grace from the ancient, unforgiving sands of the Arabian desert. From a distance, it is a mirage made real, a testament to a particular brand of human ambition that believes no dream is too large, no vision too extravagant. Its skyline is a language of power, each tower a new syllable in an ongoing epic of wealth and modernity. The air hums with the quiet, relentless pulse of commerce and aspiration. It is a place where reality is meticulously curated, where surfaces are polished to such a high sheen that they reflect not what is, but what one wishes to see. This is a world built on the bedrock of perception, where the seamless facade is the highest art form, and value is often determined by the brilliance of the exterior rather than the substance of the interior. It is within this dazzling, disorienting context that the tragedy of Aisha Al-Mansouri unfolded, a story that begins as a modern fairy tale and unravels into a chilling allegory about the gilded cages we construct and the profound human cost of maintaining the illusion. Aisha's entry into the highest echelons of this world was not a step but a leap, orchestrated with the precision of a royal coronation. Her marriage to Sheikh Omar Al-Fad was the social event of a season, a spectacle designed to be consumed and admired. The ballroom at the Burj Al Arab, a sail-shaped monument to luxury, provided the stage. 1,000 white roses, flown in from the gardens of Grasse and each selected for its flawless bloom, scented the air with a cloying, funereal sweetness. The diamond tiara placed upon Aisha's brow, rumored to have once adorned a forgotten Egyptian queen, was less an accessory and more a symbol of acquisition, its cold weight a precursor to the constraints that would follow. The cameras flashed, capturing every curated detail. The smile that touched her lips but did not quite reach her eyes, the gentle clasp of her hand in Omar's, the way her gown, woven with threads of actual gold, caught the light. To the assembled guests and the wider world watching through the filtered lens of social media, it was the perfect convergence of old money and new power, of beauty and influence. Aisha was the protagonist in a public narrative of success, the final, perfect piece in the puzzle of Sheikh Omar's impeccable life. Yet, the reality behind this pristine image began to curdle with a quiet swiftness the moment the last limousine pulled away. The mansion on Palm Jumeirah, a sprawling architectural marvel of marble and glass, was less a home and more a beautifully appointed fortress of solitude. Its vastness was not liberating but isolating. The endless, open-plan living spaces seemed to swallow sound and life itself. The silence there was not one of peace, but of absence, a vacuum that pressed in on the eardrums. Her footsteps, even in soft-soled slippers, would echo through the cavernous hallways, a lonely metronome marking the passage of empty hours. The floor-to-ceiling windows, which offered breathtaking, cinematic views of the cerulean Arabian Gulf, served as constant reminders of a world from which she was now strangely removed, a beautiful panorama she could observe but no longer truly touch. Her husband, the charismatic and formidable Sheikh Omar, was a ghost in his own home. His presence was a sporadic, unpredictable event, often announced late at night by the sigh of the private elevator, and the scent of foreign cologne and expensive cigar smoke that clung to his clothes like a second skin. In his early appearances, he played the part of the doting groom with consummate skill, showering Aisha with extravagant gifts and whispered endearments that felt like lines from a well-rehearsed play. But this charming facade was brittle. It could shatter in an instant, replaced by a brooding, impenetrable detachment. He would retreat for hours into his soundproofed office, the low, indistinct murmur of his voice on international calls a constant, unsettling hum through the walls. His business trips were sudden, unexplained, and could last for days, leaving Aisha as the solitary queen of an empty kingdom. She tried to fill the void with the duties expected of her station, redecorating suites that required no improvement, planning elaborate menus for dinners that were often eaten alone, attending charity galas where she was more exhibit than participant. The initial excitement of her new role faded, replaced by a monotonous routine that gnawed at her spirit. She was living a life of unparalleled material privilege. Yet she had never felt more insignificant, her identity slowly being erased by the sheer weight of her luxurious surroundings. In this echoing, soul-deadening isolation, the only person who offered a flicker of genuine human warmth was Maritz, the Filipina maid. She was a woman in her late 20s, but her eyes, the color of dark coffee, held a weariness that seemed to belong to someone much older, someone who had witnessed too much. She had been in the Sheikh's employ for over 3 years, and she moved through the mansion with a quiet efficiency, knowing its rhythms and secrets like the lines on her own palms. She was the one who showed Aisha how to operate the complex smart home system. Which room received the morning sun, and the unspoken rules that governed the household staff. Aisha, desperate for any form of authentic connection, began to seek her out, asking her to stay for tea after her duties were done, clinging to these small moments of normalcy. Yet, even this fledgling friendship was threaded with a tension Aisha could not initially decipher. Maritz was always polite, but her warmth was guarded, her smiles never quite reaching the profound sadness in her eyes. Aisha began to notice the small, telling details, the faint, yellowing bruise on her wrist that she would quickly cover with a sleeve, the way she would physically startle, a barely suppressed flinch, if the Sheikh's name was called too suddenly, the way her gaze would sometimes drift to a decorative air vent or a smoke detector, her body tensing as if awaiting a blow. One afternoon, Aisha walked into the main living area and found Maritz frozen, her cleaning cloth suspended in midair, staring with naked dread at a small, dark lens nestled almost invisibly within an ornate wall sconce. "What is it, Maritz?" Aisha had asked, her own heart inexplicably quickening. The maid had snapped her gaze away, the mask of professional composure slamming back into place. "Nothing, madam," she had murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "Just dust. I will see to it." But it wasn't dust. And in the pit of her stomach, Aisha knew it. It was a crack in the perfect wall, a glimpse of the rotten foundation beneath the gilt. To understand the terrifying reality Aisha was stumbling toward, one must venture into the bifurcated soul of Sheikh Omar Al-Fad. The public man was a masterpiece of engineering, a titan of industry, a generous philanthropist, a figure of piety and power. He was the man who closed multi-million-dollar deals with a handshake and whose name on a charity roster guaranteed its success. But the private man, the one who existed behind the soundproof doors of his study and within the hidden corridors of his own mind, was an archivist of control. His true obsession was not merely wealth or influence, but a more intimate and insidious form of possession. His tool of choice was the camera lens. Long before Aisha's arrival, he had perfected his system. The mansion was not a home, it was a stage, and he was the unseen director and sole audience. It was a spiderweb of hidden, high-definition surveillance. Miniature cameras were nestled in smoke detectors, embedded in the frames of mirrors, disguised as the heads of screws, their tiny, unblinking eyes recording every movement, every conversation, every private moment. He recorded everything, business meetings to later dissect the weaknesses of his partners, parties to catalog the indiscretions of his guests, and most disturbingly, the daily lives of those who lived under his roof. This was not merely about security, it was about dominion. The footage was his digital library of power, a collection of souls he had captured and catalogued. Maritz had been his first and most broken specimen. She had arrived from a rural village in the Philippines, her documents promising fair pay and decent conditions, her heart filled with the universal hope of providing a better life for her family back home. The Sheikh's attention began with small, calculated kindnesses, a bonus slipped into her pay envelope, a new mobile phone, a kind word. Then, the boundaries were systematically erased. The kindness morphed into expectation, the expectation into demand, the demand into coercion. Her passport was taken, locked away in his private safe under the guise of safekeeping. Her communications were monitored, her movements restricted. What began as employment had transformed into a form of indentured servitude. He didn't just own her labor, he owned her fear, her silence, her very existence. And he documented it all on his private, encrypted server, a chilling trophy case of his absolute dominance. When Aisha arrived, fresh and hopeful, she became his newest and most prized exhibit. He would spend hours in the dead of night, reviewing the footage of her, studying her the way a lepidopterist might study her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Then her eyes landed on it, a folder labeled System Logs_Archives. It was a bland, technical, utterly unremarkable name, the kind designed to be overlooked. Yet an instinct deeper than reason told her to click. The folder opened to reveal a grid of video files, meticulously organized by date. Some timestamps reached back to a period before her wedding. Others were from just days ago. With a breath caught in her throat, she clicked the most recent file. The screen filled with a high-angle view of her own bedroom. She saw herself from the night before, captured in the intimate act of brushing her hair before bed, a private moment she had believed was hers alone. A cold wave of violation washed over her, so visceral it felt physical. This was not a single camera, it was a pervasive, intimate invasion. Frantic now, she opened another file, this one dated just 2 weeks after their wedding. The perspective was different, his private sitting room. And what she saw on the screen made the air leave her lungs in a sickening rush. It was Omar. And it was Maritz. The scene was one of shocking intimacy, but as the initial, searing wave of betrayal receded, a colder, more terrifying realization dawned. She leaned closer, her eyes fixed on Maritz's face. It was not the face of a willing lover. It was a mask of hollow resignation, her eyes empty, her movements devoid of any authentic emotion. This was not an affair, this was predation. This was the exercise of power in its most debased form. The sound of a tray rattling in the hallway made her jump, slamming the laptop shut as if it were on fire. Marit stood in the doorway, a tea service in her hands. Her face was a ghastly white, her eyes wide with a terror that confirmed everything. In that single, silent, electric exchange of glances, the entire, ugly truth passed between them. Aisha saw not a rival, but a fellow captive, a sister in silence. Maritz saw that the last innocent. And the house had finally been forced to look upon the monster, and in her eyes was the bleak knowledge of what that sight would cost. What followed was not hysterical, but eerily methodical. A strange, unnerving calm descended upon Aisha, the quiet that follows the final, accepted verdict. The pieces of her fractured reality, the perfumes, the absences, the hidden fear in Maritz's eyes, all snapped into a horrifying, coherent picture. She was not a wife, she was the central exhibit in a museum of misery, married to her curator and jailer. Her actions in the hours that followed were not those of a woman planning her death, but of a woman determined to bear witness. She printed several of the most incriminating screenshots. The time-stamped evidence of her husband's duplicity and criminal abuse. She placed them in a plain white envelope, and wrote his name on the front with a steady hand. Then she sat at her vanity, took out a piece of the gold-edged stationery reserved for thank-you notes, and wrote 5 words that were both an accusation and a testament. You made me see everything. She did not sign it. She did not need to. She tucked it into her jewelry box, a message in a bottle for the world that would inevitably come searching for answers. She was, in that moment, not a victim succumbing to despair, but a witness preparing her testimony for the final court, That evening, when Omar returned, she was waiting for him in the vast living room. The envelope on the glass table between them. She was preternaturally calm, her posture erect, her smile a fragile, tragic mask. "I believe this is for you," she said, her voice disturbingly steady. He opened it. The transformation in his face was instantaneous and terrifying. The polished, charismatic facade shattered, replaced by a visage of pure, cold rage. The veins in his temple throbbed. "You foolish, foolish girl," he hissed, his voice low and venomous, stripped of all its cultivated charm. "What have you done?" What transpired in the penthouse in the minutes that followed is the central, unresolved mystery that echoes through the hallways of power in Dubai to this day. The official report, polished and disseminated by a powerful legal machine, tells a simple story. An emotionally distraught woman, heartbroken over her husband's infidelity, walked onto the balcony in a state of acute depression and jumped to her death. It is a tidy, tragic, and ultimately dismissive narrative. But Maritz, in her sworn, and later suppressed, testimony to the police, painted a different picture. She spoke of hearing the Sheikh's voice, roaring in a fury that shook the very air. She heard the sound of something shattering, a crystal vase, a glass table, a violent punctuation to the argument. Then a scream. Not a wail of despair, but a short, sharp cry of pure terror. And then an abrupt, deafening silence. Minutes later, a security camera in the building's landscaped courtyard captured the final, tragic image: Aisha's body, her white nightgown billowing around her like a fallen petal against the cold, hard marble. When the police and paramedics swarmed the scene, they found the envelope with its damning contents. They found the note in her jewelry box. And on Aisha's body, the forensics team found details that the Sheikh's wealth and influence could not immediately explain: faint, but distinct, bruising on her wrists. The unmistakable shape of grasping fingers. A delicate gold necklace she always wore was found broken, one half still tangled in her hair as if pulled. These were not the marks of a quiet surrender to despair, they were the evidence of a struggle, the silent testament of a final, desperate fight for life. In the days and weeks that followed, the immense, ruthless machinery of power swung into action, oiled by vast wealth and unassailable privilege. The Sheikh, insulated by an army of the world's most expensive lawyers, proclaimed his innocence. His grief performed perfectly for the cameras. He painted Aisha as emotionally fragile, unstable, driven to a tragic end by the heartbreaking discovery of his minor indiscretion. The note, "You made me see everything," was framed not as an indictment of his entire monstrous reality, but as the sad, final words of a jealous wife. Maritz was systematically discredited, labeled a jealous and unreliable employee, her visa abruptly revoked, and she was swiftly deported back to the Philippines, her voice silenced before it could do any more damage. The case, under mounting and invisible pressure, was quietly, efficiently closed. Ruled a suicide. The story, so sensational and explosive for a brief moment, vanished from the headlines as if it had never been, scrubbed from the public consciousness with the brisk efficiency of a maid wiping dust from a mirror. Sheikh Omar Al-Fad resumed his life of influence and luxury. The mansion on the Palm was sold, and he moved on, his reputation professionally rehabilitated, his power intact. But stories like this, rooted in profound injustice and human suffering, do not simply end when the case files are sealed. They refuse to be buried. They seep into the very foundations of the places where they occurred, they linger in the collective memory, and they transform into ghost stories for the modern age. To this day, residents of that luxury tower tell uneasy stories. They speak of the balcony on the 27th floor, the one that remains empty. They say that on particularly still, quiet nights, when the wind blows in from the desert and whispers through the glass and steel canyons of the city, you can sometimes hear a faint, persistent sound, a tapping, like fingernails on glass. They say that if you are foolish enough to glance upward from the courtyard below, you might catch a fleeting shadow, a glimpse of white against the deep indigo of the night sky, a silent, lingering reminder. Aisha Al-Mansouri's fall was not an ending. It was an opening, a crack in the perfect, polished facade of a world that values image above truth. Her 5-word note was not a confession of defeat, it was a powerful, enduring accusation flung against the walls of silence and complicity. It challenges us to be more than passive consumers of the curated realities presented to us. It urges us to look deeper, to listen more intently to the whispers that struggle to be heard from behind the gilded walls, to question the official narratives that are too neat, too convenient. Her story is a haunting echo in the splendid silence, a stark reminder that the most beautiful cages are still prisons, and that the relentless pursuit of a perfect surface often requires the brutal suppression of an imperfect, and all too human, truth. The greatest tragedy of all would be for that echo to fade away, unanswered and unheeded, lost in the desert wind.